All right. Today is November 18th, 2024, and this is Historic Preservation Commission.
Recording in progress.
Do I need to say that again? Good evening. Today is Monday, November 18th, 2024, and this is the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. We'll have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Keller,
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Berg, Commissioner Whidden,
Here.
and Chair Haley.
Here.
And Marty's just come online.
So you do see him on there? Okay.
He
Great.
just joined.
Thank you. All right, so our agenda this evening, if we have any changes or additions, otherwise we can have a motion to approve.
I would move to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Are there any public comments that are not on our agenda this evening? And is there anyone online tonight? Okay. I'm seeing none. We'll move on to our probable cause for 1016 Main Street, and we'll have a staff presentation.
Thank you and good evening, Chair and Commission members. This is Emily Klein Gibson, Planner 2 with the staff presentation. So this is a probable cause application for 1016 Main Street. This is a residential property located on the east side of Main Street with Short Street to the north, South Street to the south, and Front Street to the east. You can also see in the photo the railroad tracks nearby, just right beside Front Street. Just a reminder, probable cause is granted, and this is how the HPC approves grants for historic structure assessments, or HSAs. HSAs cover up to $4,000 for residential properties and $9,000 for commercial properties. This is a reimbursement, it's non-matching, and the landmarking criteria is used to evaluate probable cause for a structure. So for 1016 Main Street, the conditions over time, the left two photos here show the historic images of the property, and the right two photos show present day conditions. There are very few changes that have been made to the exterior of the building, and permit records also reflect that. The house was likely constructed from a Sears and Roebuck do-it-yourself home building kit, which was available from 1908 to 1948. The architecture of the property exhibits a front gabled roof and front porch, and it's the Queen Anne architectural style. Only 3 homes of this style are located at the Caledonia Place subdivision. For the landmark criteria, this is not an exact approximation. This is an approximation of the age. We don't have exact numbers, but we believe it's about 114 to 129 years old. For the architectural significance, as I mentioned again, this is a Queen Anne architectural style, and it is also features the front gabled roofs and the front porch. For social significance, the property was used as a rental home for many years by the Ashe family, and later ownership include the Petrelli family, who were of Italian descent and lived in the house. Mr. Petrelli and his son worked at the local coal mines, including the Lucas and the Centennial Mine during World War II. And as for the physical integrity, again, the building has minimal exterior changes and has not moved from its original location. This property was also registered to the National Register of Historic Places in 1986. So with all of this, staff recommends finding probable cause and approving a grant of up to $4,000 towards the cost of a residential historic structure assessment. This concludes staff presentation. I'm available for any questions. The applicant is also here and would like to say a few words. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff? Thank you. We'll have the applicant, and if you want to just state your name and city of residence.
Andy Johnson, DAJ Design here in Louisville. I think that this is another real nice, straightforward application. It's really fun reading this report. So we did a records request on this property because we wanted to dig up everything we could on it, given that it's on the National Register. if you get a chance, and you may have already done this on other applications, this was part of that early or mid 80s push to do historic preservation on a number of structures, both commercial and residential. A lot of them are still in really great shape, and this one obviously is, even though not a lot of intentional effort has been put towards preservation. We just got lucky with this one. The foundation has definitely got, stuff, it's stone. Pros and cons of that, of course, which we've talked about in the past. Read the report when you get a sec, just because it's a good insight into probably further applications that may come forward with houses or structures similar to this. The background that was generated in the 80s is still very relevant today, and it gives some great history of just Louisville and our context for how we built here. Not just like how Louisville was, but how we built here. And I think we miss that sometimes because there's some gaps in our understanding of who built, why did they build, and what were the motivations to build what they built. And Louisville has a really kind of cool history in that we were never a company town. And so the reason we have so much diversity like this home is because residents had the freedom to really do whatever they wanted. In terms of the Sears and Roebuck's home, I've had this come up before on past projects. There are actually a number of companies that were doing kit homes or railroad homes, as some people like to call them. And it makes sense that it was this way. They flat packed them like an IKEA package and delivered them here. Not all was pre-cut studs, but it was pretty much just like that. It does look like a Sears and Roebuck's home. I've looked at the images from catalogs that we have. However, there were other companies copying those designs, and so it could have been another company. Usually, Sears and Roebuck's were stamped with all the studs, at least the wall studs, sometimes the floor joists, and we just kind of in a cursory overview, we did not see that, but it doesn't mean that it's not. So anyway, we're really excited about this one, and the owners are very excited about doing a little bit of work and moving in. So we'll dig in. If you have any questions, please feel free while I'm here.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
No?
Okay. So you haven't found any stamps at this point on any of the studs or anything?
We haven't seen anything yet.
No.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any comments from the public? And if none, we'll bring it back for discussion.
I would say this one's a pretty easy one to move forward with, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at the historic photos and you look at the existing photos right now, usually there's something that's really significantly changed in a decent number of them, and this one's not that way necessarily. So I'd be in support.
Yeah, I agree. It's really straightforward. 50 years or older, great architectural integrity, good social history. So
It's nice to see a Queen Anne style as well. It'd be really interesting to see what we learn from the HSA. So support this as well.
and I think it's especially, we're always hopeful that our national registered homes would also be locally landmarked. So that's good to have another one.
I think it's especially good when we can preserve Main Street. That's so visible to visitors. It's part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yep. Anyone like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the probable cause to do a historic structure assessment at 1016 Main Street.
I'll second. And we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Whitten,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
and Chair Haley.
Yes. All right. Thank you. We look forward to seeing this again in the future. All right, our next item is a discussion about our bylaws, which is a draft update.
Great. So Commissioner Dunlap and I have been on a subcommittee since the beginning of the session in 2024 to update the bylaws, which was required because they're about 10 years old. We began that work in the spring, and we've worked with Meredith Youth on that. And we tonight have a draft of the bylaws to show to the commissioners. We're not able to vote on that draft just yet. This is more just to have some kind of review what we, the changes that we have made and the draft we've given to Meredith. Once she completes her review, then we can have a formal vote on it, but it's a good chance to get some kind of feedback on it and share it with the work we've done.
The bylaws are sort of rules of order of how we conduct our meetings, and the city, with all the commissions, has added some verbiage about dealing with remote meetings, Zoom meetings, I guess, whatever the official term would be. But a lot of the significant parts of change of these bylaws are from the city, and we had the opportunity to look at the other parts of it. The bylaws are just one part of how we conduct the Historic Preservation Commission. They mesh with parts of the city municipal code that's been enacted over time, and there are several different sections there. There are some resolutions that have been passed by the city council, mostly correlating to votes in the town to establish the HPC or the historic plan. And there's also reference to the state historic business, which is called History Colorado, and it has some sections that define a certified local group, which we are, which are the local the people carrying out historic preservation. So all of those have to kind of sync together, and in some cases they haven't synced too well. So we came, the things that the city is proposing for taping meetings and doing remote meetings is all pretty straightforward, and it's the biggest part of the changes, but we had a few specific ones we wanted to talk about. There's a list of the duties of the Historic Preservation Commission. Most of them, some of them have to do with the fact that we act as a quasi-judicial body in hearing applications to be do preservation, the various steps in that. But one thing that seemed to be missing is that the broader picture is that we're responsible for setting up the preservation plans, and it's not really quite called out. It is in some of the municipal code, but it's a little hidden. So we added a duty of helping develop the preservation plan and review it, because just so it's clear that we have a responsibility for things like that more than just the reviewing of things. There was a question from about the membership of the commission, that 40% of the members should be professionals in a preservation sort of field. And when we looked into it further in the state definitions for the certified local group, it wasn't exactly like that. That was a recommendation, but it's if you didn't really have 40%, we probably do, because everybody, well, no, we're not all architects, but we all at least have an interest in the history of it. But it wasn't a hard and fast rule, and we are making an effort to have people who are qualified, and certainly we are. So that, anyway, we clarified that one a bit.
We also, along with that, had clarified, we'd all sort of heard at some point, at least several of us, and discussed that maybe there was a requirement for Old Town residency, and we did find in a resolution that there is a requirement of 2 sitting members be residents of Old Town.
However, all of those seem to have an out if you really couldn't do that. That you know, they wouldn't have to be. We do a best effort, and we're still going to have a Historic Preservation Commission.
And I think as far as the state requirements, the professionals is a state requirement though, isn't that correct?
It was this, yes, it's a History Colorado Certified Local Government
Right, so that's one
requirement.
that's not really as wiggle room as much as the Old Town residents.
It's a requirement of 40% of the
Okay.
board, but what they listed to fit the criteria, the different professions, were actually pretty broad.
Okay.
And again, a subclause allowed for the city, if they couldn't find that many to fit the 40%, they could actually waive that.
Okay.
So knowing who sits on our commission right now, we are above 40%.
Right,
With
totally.
the different backgrounds. So it didn't seem like it'd be a problem either way.
Right, that's good.
Yeah, it turned out to be pretty good to do this research, to look at all these different texts governing what we do kind of coming together. There was part of the bylaws that talked about handling an alteration certificate when somebody wants to make a change to a landmarked property. And it sort of was unclear if there was a time in which that should happen. And if you dug deep enough into the other documents, it did say that if someone was issued an alteration certificate, that is to change a landmark structure, that they should do it within 3 years. And that we and the city council can set that time. So anyway, it's probably redundant, but we took that sentence and put it into the bylaws with the alteration certificate. There was several times that to alter something was to demolish it, move it, or it was removal. And we didn't see what the difference between removal and demolishing or moving was, but that was what was in all the other codes. So we decided that should be left, even though it's probably awkward.
So, as Gary said, the biggest changes here are ones that have to do with online meetings, because 10 years ago that wasn't in the bylaws and they hadn't been updated. So those are sort of the more substantive changes to the bylaws. The ones that we mentioned, we're happy to hear thoughts on, but they were pretty straightforward. I think the only one that is worth discussing is not the only one worth, but the one that we probably will we will be talking more about in the next discussion is the 50 years older versus 1955 as the as the period of significance. So we'll get more feedback from everybody on that in the next discussion, and to kind of see what we want to do with the bylaws with that. Other than that, the changes were pretty small from what we found. It really was mostly clarifying what some of the language meant, so that we could kind of understand ourselves and better educate the commission.
There is a copy with a lot of annotations in the packet for tonight's meeting. It may not be clear, but I think all that stuff's in there.
So one of the things I noticed in there is one of the first portions under Article 1, you had, let me see, duties, and then there was 7 different duties of the commission, and then there was one that said update and implement historic preservation plan, and then, am I able to read off what's on there? Okay. Potentially have this support other initiatives such as conservation easement properly done, and the ability to acquire and preserve appropriate historic structures if available. Seemed like one we should probably talk about.
Yeah, this, maybe it shouldn't have been the version that went out to everybody, because that was just kind of speculation that as we were establishing a plan, there were a lot of things that could and maybe should be taken up. It wasn't a proposal to put those in the bylaws.
Okay.
Those are
But-
examples of what would be, what would fall under the planning.
Yeah, the ongoing planning of the extension of the preservation plan in the town.
Okay.
Can we provide clarification?
Absolutely.
So there's, so the bylaws don't necessarily call out purpose and duty of the commission. There's a couple of other documents that very specifically. So I think one of the things the city clerk had pointed out is if you want to really clarify your purpose and duty, there's two resolutions. There's an ordinance from 2002 that creates the Historic Preservation Commission. And then that says that your powers and duties shall be determined by resolution. And then in 2002, council passed a resolution. So I don't know if you've actually reviewed that as part of the bylaws review, but if not, I'd recommend that we make sure that the bylaws match that resolution, and if you want to specifically change the power and duties, that resolution be updated as well to match. So I think that was one of Meredith's notes, was to make sure that we match those, and there would have to be a formal action from council related to that. So that's, we can send you those if you don't have those, and we can have further discussion about those documents. Did that answer everything?
Just want the alteration certificate, requiring 3 years, that would have to also be done through an ordinance change.
No, actually, that already is part of the ordinances. However, it wasn't real clear in the bylaws when it talked about an alteration certificate being done in a reasonable amount of time. So it was deliberately redundant to put that sentence in there, but it already existed that it should be done within 3 years. But again, it's about 7 different documents or sources that we were looking at that, and we did review them all, I think, to put those things together. And you're right, to add to our duties is, it is covered vaguely elsewhere, but not really to say that we're going to work on our preservation plan. So it seemed like that was much in line with the 6 things that were our duties in the bylaws.
So staff is just saying if we want to add that, we would need to add it to it would need to go into the resolution more. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So that's the-
Resolution 34, Series 2022, it's a resolution setting forth the purposes, terms, responsibilities, powers, duties, and other matters concerning the Historic Preservation Commission. So that has a lot of detail of what council's kind of empowered you to do, and then, of course, the city code has further description of how you process applications, review criteria, and so forth. So if you want to formally change any of those, you certainly can. I think certainly the Historic Preservation Master Plan is under your purview. So if we wanted to, council has to adopt that, but you would probably be a recommending body, just like anything else on those, on that plan. So if you wanted to reflect that in a formal manner, then it might be worth updating that resolution. If that felt important.
Well, so I have 2 comments here really quick. One is anytime you change something in one area, again, it's nice to just reference that other area rather than changing it 2, 3 spots. I mean, that's where you end up with everything doesn't match up and you end up with errors and issues. The other thing, again, just jumping back to my original question, is the ability to acquire and preserve appropriate historic structures if available. Seemed like a that statement right there was really what I was getting at. Okay.
So the city has the power to acquire, as part of the program. We don't have a lot of details about how the city can do that, but the power is there to do it. There's authorization to do it through the city code.
If that's there already, I'm okay with it, but if we were adding that to something that was not there, then I was questioning whether or not we should be bringing that up at this point.
No, we weren't proposing that that be added.
Okay.
Again, this was part of our discussion, but the ordinances do say that we are the primary direction for historic preservation.
Yep.
But we are advising the city council, who ultimately makes all those decisions.
So what we're discussing, like the ability to acquire properties, is an example of one of the things that will be part of us potentially updating the historic preservation plan. But we'd added updating and implementing the historic preservation plan to the other list of duties because those list of duties didn't seem fully fully inclusive of what we do.
Okay.
So, again, we're not voting on
Yeah.
adding or not adding that tonight, but we will be at some point. So we'd love your feedback now if it seems appropriate to add that to this list of duties. The other duties are landmarking buildings, approving alterations to buildings, approving demolition of buildings, incentivizing historic preservation, utilizing the fund, and education and outreach. So I think we do a lot of that in these meetings. But we also, have a lot of discussions in the meetings, and then we've had at least one retreat where we do discuss the historic preservation plan and how it should potentially be updated. So we put that in there in the subcommittee, thinking this would be a good addition potentially to our duties. So, we're open to feedback on how people feel about that.
Yeah, I just haven't seen us work towards any of those specific items since I've been here as far as acquiring.
Right, we never have, but we have, right,
So that was my question.
yeah, just making sure that was legit. Does anyone have feedback on adding that one, or?
I think it'd be fine, again, just sometimes referencing other items would be better than restating them multiple times and having to comb through and find all this stuff, which becomes problematic. It is hard to jump back and forth code-wise. So, just a suggestion.
The issue is, though, if we have, 7 different sources of this, it's pretty difficult to put them all together. And this was just to try to make pretty clear that we were not just a quasi-judicial body.
So again, I have no problem with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Chair Haley?
Yes, I'm sorry.
To add to the conversation, I did find the section about 3 years on an alteration certificate. It does say that you can set a time limit on any alteration certificate. It's optional, but you can set one, and it has to be at least 3 years. So you could do 3 years, or you could do more than 3 years. Is what I mean. So it's no less than 3 years to apply for a building permit for any alteration certificate.
Okay, no less than 3 years to do what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So I think what is being proposed is that you reflect in the bylaws that you can put a time limit on the issuance of an alteration certificate. So once you issue it, property
Right.
owner has a time limit. So the city code says you have the authority to do that, like Commissioner Dunlap. But I just wanted to clarify, it has to be at least 3 years.
Okay.
And you can choose to do more. So
Okay.
a minimum of 3 years.
They have at least 3 years to
That at
do it.
least- Yes.
Okay,
but I
that makes
think-
sense.
yeah. But I think you would have to explicitly impose it.
Right.
So we would have to start putting it in your resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you wanted to do 3 years to be consistent, or I'm also saying you could choose to do more than 3 years. But it's a minimum of 3, if that makes sense, that you have the
Right.
authority.
Okay, so if we say nothing, it's 3 years, basically? No.
No, it's
Okay.
3, it's minimum 3 years.
Minimum, okay, okay,
When you're approving alterations.
Yeah.
okay,
You should make a point of putting it in the approval resolution.
okay,
If you want to set the time limit.
right, okay.
that sentence was deliberately redundant with what's already in the ordinances. It was never clear to me that we had a need or a responsibility to maybe set that limit. And we're authorized to set that limit with the city council, of course. So it was deliberately redundant, but it makes it real clear that that's an HPC responsibility. Anyway,
It's good.
thanks. Commissioner Burke, did you have any more to say on it? Or?
I don't think so. I think really the next big discussion is the 50 years versus
Yeah, that's, I guess, our
1955,
next
but
item.
other than that, there were, pretty minor changes.
Yeah, that looked good.
And they, once city council adds additional information to these bylaws that they're adding to all the bylaws, then these bylaws will go under administrative review for the work that Gary and I did in the subcommittee, and then they'll come back for vote. So, so just so you know, clear up the process.
So does city council have other things that they're gonna add to each, like to all of them, blanket?
They
adding?
do. They're working on, I believe, a code of conduct, some more changes to code of conduct that will be the same standard across boards. So that's not in here right now. There is
Yeah.
code of conduct information in here, but it's being updated.
Yeah, that's good to know. Okay. Yeah, thanks for all that work and going through all of the code and all that. That's a lot of. The next is discussion for the landmark designation for 50 years or older versus before 1955. So this will be, do we want a staff presentation for this? Great.
Oh. Oh, good.
All right, yes, so this next item is a discussion direction for the difference in time periods for landmark designations, which consider buildings that are at least 50 years old, and demolition review applications, which consider buildings built prior to 1955. I'll provide a brief background on the history of these differences. A more complete background can be found in the staff report and all the attachments if you are curious about more of the information here. And then at the end, there's a few questions I prepared just to facilitate the discussion. So to provide some background, the ordinance that created the historic preservation chapter in our municipal code was adopted in 2005 by City Council. This is where all original regulations for our historic preservation program comes from primarily, including the minimum age of structures that we would classify as historic. This minimum age was set for all applications to be 50 years originally. This age requirement remained the same for about a decade until 2015 when the Preservation Master Plan was adopted. In the plan, towards the bottom was a list of action items to be achieved in order of urgency. Under the immediate list of action items was to modify the age requirement from structures that are at least 50 years old to structures built in or before 1955, which was earlier decided by City Council to be the end of Louisville's historic period of significance, because it was the year that the last mines in the city closed. Staff believes this action item was intended to replace the age requirement for all applications and not just demolition review, since there's no differentiation in application types that the master plan talks about. It's kind of just a blanket time period. However, 2 months later after the adoption of the Preservation Master Plan, this ordinance, which is 1709-2015, was approved by City Council, and that officially changed the age requirement for demolition reviews only. This change, again, was from buildings that were constructed at least 50 years ago, was the original time period, was changed to buildings being constructed in or before 1955. Based on Historic Preservation Commission and City Council minutes at the time, there was not a lot of reasoning as to why only demolition review applications were changed and not all applications as recommended by the Preservation Master Plan. And there was also discussion among council members as to whether the change in time period should be messed with at all. However, at the end of the day, the ordinance was approved with a 4-3 vote. And as noted in the staff report for this ordinance back in 2015, staff believed at the time that the change essentially would reduce the amount of applications received and cut down review time and duties for both staff and commissioners. Also in this ordinance included administrative review regulations for demolition reviews, which again, with the intention of possibly reducing staff and commissioner workload. So yeah, with all of that background, I have 3 discussion questions. I'll just read them out here. The first one is, what question do you have about the language for evaluating demolition reviews and landmarking based on current time periods for each? The second question is, do you believe the change in criteria from 50 years to 1955 affects the preservation of historically significant structures? And the third question, it's a 2-part question. How do these time periods fit into Commission's long-term visions for historic preservation in Louisville? And are there any adjustments you think should be made to align with that vision? And that's the end of the staff presentation. Thank you.
You may want, just for proper procedure, you may want to go back just very quickly to the bylaws and see if there's any public comment.
Oh,
And then
that's good.
on this item, see if
Okay. Sure, that's great. So we're going to go back to our bylaws draft update and see if there's any public comments on this. Is anyone from the public? I don't think there was anyone online. Okay. All right. And I'll make sure to do that for this also. Do we usually have public comment for discussions? Yeah?
Yeah, the
For this
practice
kind
law
of
where
thing?
commissions really
Okay.
anything on an agenda, we typically will do
Okay, that's good. So a little bit of history on this too is the national standard for historic is 50 years or older. So that's one of the, that's a national standard, and it's also keeps history moving so that we don't ever get stuck in a time period where all of a sudden something is no longer significant. So that's, and you can probably speak to that more. So I will say the Historic Preservation Commission was very in favor of keeping the 50 years or older because it's in line with national standards. And I think, if I remember correctly, City Council felt, obviously it does, the more time passes, the more homes will fall into 50 years or older. So I think from a practicality, I'm trying to think of from the staff perspective, it could be a lot more work as we get more and more houses. We obviously have the Old Town overlay that kind of keeps our most of the houses in Louisville are within that perimeter. But potentially we could have many, many more houses that are coming. So that's just kind of some background, is that we are actually out of line with the national standards when we say 1955 or earlier. So, and Sloan, I'll have you disagree or agree with that. The second thing is, the second question was kind of like, how does this affect, I can't remember the exact question, but the question that comes to mind, or my answer to number 2, or question to that, would be, what do we think? So do you believe change in criteria from 50 years to 1955 affects the preservation of historically significant structures? So potentially we have some mid-century homes that may be 55, like older, or built after 1955, that we might find significant. So, but we can still landmark. So that's the thing too, is the landmarking we can still do 50 years or older, But from the process part, only things 1955 or newer would actually come to staff or come to us for demolition review, if that makes sense. So if someone can still landmark a home that's 1965, if it's 50 years, older than 50 years, but from a process standpoint, that house would not necessarily be flagged to us if it went for demolition review because it's older than 1955. So we as a commission have to decide, like, is 1955 like the year? Like, is that where we're like, yep, that's good, and anyone that wants to demo something after, does that make sense? That wasn't very clear, but
I think this, if I can jump in for 2 seconds. I think this is 2 separate questions. I think it's one of the demolition review and 2 of historic
right,
50-year criteria. So
exactly,
I have opinions and thoughts on it, but I'd like to open it up.
right.
Yeah, I think what we noticed is that it wasn't consistent through these 7 different sources, and the city clerk seemed to indicate that, they'd meant to have things in sync and it didn't happen. And I'd heard from city council members too, the discussion of this, and it was not clear. So I don't know if it's something that was just never resolved or it was intended to be resolved as both.
So the 1955 was marked, and then as a compromise, we came back and said, okay, we can landmark, like the 50 years or older, anyone can landmark, but the demo is what is tied to the 1955.
Okay.
So that was our compromise, basically.
But-
That's why it's,
But we wouldn't landmark something that also was not in the historic district or the old town overlay?
we can now, actually.
Yeah.
We can still landmark. They wouldn't be, they can't get grants? Is that what they don't get the?
Yeah, they can. The only difference is it has to be approved by a
City.
supermajority of
Right.
city council, but they have the same opportunities as any landmark.
Right. It's like the Red Barn is one we always talk about. It would be,
Oh, okay.
and that is the significant one that kind of made us like, we want that opportunity for homes outside of the
Yeah.
overlay.
Maybe if there's further discussion, that would be part of it as well. Not 55 or 50 years, but area.
So you're saying reassessing the area or the
Well, that
boundaries?
was always on the list, or on the agenda to look at the Old Town overlay zoning. But with the fires and everything, I think that was pushed back.
Right, so when it comes to the authorization for the grant program, that was renewed by the voters, the last time it was renewed, it opened it up to the entire city. So the entire city is eligible for landmarking if the structure is 50 years or older. So I don't think we can change that because it was done
Right.
through the vote of the residents. The 50-year standard could possibly be changed because that's in the ordinance. But whatever we determine the age is, it's still going to be citywide.
So I feel pretty strongly about this particular topic because I think that history is a living, breathing thing. And it frightens me a little bit to set a specific date because I think we need to challenge bias against architectural style and age of things because it feels familiar. Especially there's different demographics, different generations of people, different architectural styles feel familiar and special or familiar and not special. And I think it's important for the commission to really challenge that bias. And so for me, the 50 years makes sense. 1955 makes less sense because that's a specific decision based on a specific perspective at a specific point in time. And to me, sort of the goal of the work that we do is not to just have it be a static thing for the city. So.
So just to bring it back to the bylaws, so one reason we're having this discussion is that the bylaws in section 5, when it's talking about demolition, had the 50 years, which was a mistake. It should have said 1955. So now it is being changed back to 1955, unless we feel that maybe that needs to be otherwise, and see if we work towards that. So I think it was erroneously not updated or just put in there wrong. And again, it might conflict with other documents that are out there that the city uses. But in the bylaws, as now modified by the city clerk, it will say 1955 for demolition. So again, this is why we're having this discussion, because we only do update these bylaws. I mean, I suppose, Rob, potentially we could, we update them every 10 years, but could we, if we had to, look at them again and change them in between that?
Yeah, if there was a need to update them, we could update them more often. And yeah, that is it doesn't match up. So if you don't want to change, I think there's the question of, do you want to consider recommending to city council changing these dates? And definitely the bylaws should be changed to match whatever is adopted.
Right, so it seemed like a good time to have this discussion, because there seems to be confusion, right? There seems to be both these phrases get said a lot in these meetings, both these time periods, and understanding, what applies to what and how we got here is important, the history of it. So I did think it was really interesting to read what the staff put in the packet, the discussion in 2015, right, where as Chair Haley said, we are not in compliance necessarily with state and federal periods of significance, whereas 50 years. And I understood the reasoning the city went with, the council, when they created the 1955. But I also feel that history is always evolving. So it seemed a bit of an odd year, sort of a bit of an arbitrary year to me to be in there.
I can see it a few different ways. One thing I can respect that they at least went with the 1955, but it never had any update moment to it. So I don't think that it should just every year we move forward, it should move forward a year. So I think there's a odd interaction there for me as far as what's going on there. The 55 date doesn't make sense to stay stagnant to me. It seems like it should be updated, and I don't know if it's a ratio or something of that sort. I did 4 different setups where you could change ratios or anything else with that. So let's say every 20 years you add 15 years to it, or I'm sorry, add 5 years to it. So you're slowly inching it up, but it grows at a slower rate than we're moving forward as a year by year setup. Seemed to make the most sense to me, but I could be wrong. The other portion, the 50 years old. That one seems like it could be a case. It allows the wiggle room for it to be a case-by-case item, but it doesn't allow for, let's just say 25 years from now, most every home in Louisville is going to come for demolition review, which doesn't make sense to me. So I think there's some in-between moment that helps me realize realistically what should happen in my opinion. So I think that the 55 date always being that is weird. That somebody picked it, and that there's a reason why I respect that there was at least something that started it, but I think it could be revised. And every 20 it goes up 5. At that point, let's just say by 2104 it's 1980. I mean, you're still hitting a lot of stuff that's going to come in there, and it has inched its way up. And there's other ways to still recognize buildings that might not fall within there that you didn't claim, but you're not making it every home in Louisville.
And at this point, if there was a house outside of Old Town overlay that was built before 1955, it would still come to us even though it's outside of the overlay, or no? Do we only see things that are in the overlay, or the whole city?
You'll see everything.
Everything.
That's
Okay.
for a landmark.
Right.
Meaning-
Well, no, for demolition.
Oh,
Because that's,
yeah.
Because that's, I think, a lot of what city council was trying to avoid was that if the homes, like, say, down Lafayette start getting into like the 70s, like they're built more like 70s, are those gonna start coming to us? Because I think that's where they were afraid, like,
That would be a reason to cap it
Right.
at 55 or
Right.
another date. You know, we do get a lot of those. There's administrative approvals for some, and then of course there's the subcommittee approvals for others, depending on what they're
Right.
doing. So yeah, if we change that date, that would have a workload impact.
right. Because at this point, if something is built 55 or earlier and it's outside of Old Town, it would come to us, or
I
you
don't
would?
know the answer to that.
Right.
My guess is yes. I think yes. I think the code says anything that's 55 or older. I don't know how many structures we have outside of Old Town that are older than that. Probably
Right.
a few.
Right. But it will be more and more. I mean, so I think that's what city council was avoiding. And so maybe even just putting, like, do we put a parameter of just like, but then when do you stop? Like, at what point do we say this part of Louisville is no longer historically significant? So, yeah, it's a big, from a staff point of view, like, it would be, could potentially be a lot of homes in the next, like, 20 years coming, so.
So again, just, I'll say one more thing and I'll leave it alone. Just trying to even build something where you could almost put like a table in there of, this is our projection through 2104, and at some point, halfway's in between, you could evaluate, and at the end of it, you evaluate it and just mark those as moments to do it. Again, you get to 2104 and you add 5 years every time, and you're at 1980, which is a lot of homes. It
Right.
really will be. And then you move 20, 40 years beyond that, 1990, that's pretty much
Right.
everything.
As well.
So, other things you have to look at is who's going to, come in asking for, structural evaluations and money that goes along with that, what you're trying to tie in with that. I hesitate to just totally remove that portion, but I understand that it needs to be moved up. And that really would be my opinion, is to build some sort of a predetermined table in there of a pace with evaluation halfway through and to the end of the table, and see where it went, would be my suggestion.
Well, and I'm also really curious of what the numbers actually are. You know, for like the 1960s, 70s,
Agreed.
80s, 90s, so that we're actually informed, because I think it starts to get a lot more in the 80s and 90s than
Yeah.
anything before that.
Right.
So I'd be curious just to inform the decision-making.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see some sort of a graphic representation or something that went with it, just to understand what you're getting into. Because I mean, this is a big question, in my opinion, if we're reevaluating. And I think it's good that we're reevaluating this, but I hesitate to jump too far into it and release the restraints. But I think that there should be some restraints on it. But it should move.
It has some broad ramifications, as you said. And if as you mentioned in the latest approval of the ordinance for the historic plan, it doesn't limit to just the old town anymore, then I guess that would indicate that any building built before 1975 in any part of Louisville could apply for preservation grant and structural assessment. So that's kind of a big deal. So worthy of discussion. The other thing is, in comparing this to the national plan preservation, this is sort of a different approach. At the national level, it's probably the Park Service who initiates landmarking something. People who work there saying they're landmarking fewer structures, and they're instead preserving more historic moments, and that they feel like they've landmarked everything that they need to. But here, the impetus for landmarking becomes the owner of a property, not us. So that really changes the dynamics of how the whole system works.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Go ahead. Yes.
So I think if it helps, you do have criteria for probable cause and landmarking. So just because somebody with 1974, 1975 in house comes
Right.
and wants to get a grant or a landmark, that's at the discretion of the commission. So I think if you're applying the criteria and there's a really interesting architectural house from 1972, that's great. Certainly, just because it's 50 years old, the commission should not be granting those the probable causes or the landmarks. So I think that's the responsibility of the commission and city council to apply, properly what's important to the city from an architectural standpoint. I know in Old Town it's different. It's very broadly applied. I don't think it would be that broadly applied outside of Old Town, but it would be
Right.
at the discretion of the commission.
Well, and I guess too that at this point, if a 1971 really unique house came up right now that just was really unique and they demoed it, we would have no say in that. That's what would happen right now.
Right.
Which, some people would be like, that's fine. And some would say, oh gosh, like that's a big deal. So that's where we are right now is they could 100% landmark, they could apply and we could say yes or no, like at our discretion. But at this point, they could absolutely do a demolition application and demo it and we would never know. So that's where we are right now.
If somebody asks for the landmarking and structural assessment of a house in the Old Town or not, and we said, well, that's not very interesting, it's not unique, let's not do that, that becomes sort of arbitrary and capricious for us to decide, nah, that house on Grant isn't really very interesting.
Well, I think at the same time, the way Louisville developed, like in the 70s, 80s, and as far as like more like tract homes and like there's not as much distinction between homes. I think there's probably a lot of ways we could argue,
Yeah.
So, but there's other cities we could look, like Denver has a lot of experience with some of the newer like 60s and 70s neighborhoods that they've already gone through it, and so we definitely have cities that we could follow and get direction for as far as how do we decide what's significant and how do we, where it's not just arbitrary or I don't really like that house or whatever, like we would have to have some good guidance that way.
So can I ask a question? Is there any way that, so I guess this is directed a little bit more towards your direction, Sloan, but is there any other program that we could have that, I guess, earmarked or identified or had other structures that were outside of some other parameters that were under that demolition review that we could somehow deal with or mark out that way where it's not just such a broad brush, but it's a individual circumstance type situation? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud a little bit.
I almost wonder if we could identify certain neighborhoods, because like Bella Vista, and there are some unique scenarios of neighborhoods that probably do have some homes that are worthy of taking another look at, that fall in this sort of gray area and are maybe more of a challenge to our bias and our vision of what historic looks like. So I wonder if there's a way of identifying locations and neighborhoods that are of interest.
So maybe if that'd be a subset under a general item that slowly crept up, that you could have other areas of interest that would just generally come into that play or something. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of something that doesn't make everything in Louisville come through here eventually. And
Right.
I'm not on this board anymore, but somebody else will be.
Right.
I guess other cities like Denver and Boulder have specific historic districts, and then it's pretty clear. But then they have very strict rules that a lot of people don't agree with.
But like Bella Vista's specific, it's always where I think about of just like that could very easily not come Because when were
Well,
those?
that's what, exactly the scenario that we're
Right.
talking about, of
Right.
things that sort of fall in between these,
Because when were those homes built?
in the early 70s, most of
Okay,
them, like
yeah, so it would
70,
be,
71, 72.
right,
So they're more than 50 years old.
right. And the location of those would be prime for demolition and the size and like, right, so, I mean, that's always like my beef with the 1955 is Bella Vista, but we're gonna say something?
Other than I'm curious where we go from here. So again, the city clerk indicated to us that it won't be, it'll be into 2025 before the city completes their updates to all the boards for the code of conduct. So, I'm wondering what our window is to figure out what we'd like to do here, to have these discussions, to then, finalize the bylaws. I don't want to rubber stamp a date in the bylaws that we're not comfortable with. So I just would love to hear more what we think about how this process needs to go to continue this discussion.
I was looking at the question coming. What was the question?
Can I ask a question about Bella Vista while you're in that mindset real quick? Are they in the Old Town overlay?
They're not.
They're not, are they? I don't think they are, yeah.
They are not in the Old Town overlay. They're just south, and it looks like there's some late 50s into the 60s.
Yeah.
Maybe, and I haven't looked at all of them, so maybe some
Right,
maybe
but
the
in
70s,
general.
But it starts in the late 50s, from what I've seen so far.
Yeah. And so one thing, just, and we'll get back to your question, is I wonder, and it kind of connects to that, if maybe figuring out for sure, like, this is our Alton overlay, do we want to add anything to it? And then what's our oldest structure in that area? I don't know if that would kind of be beneficial to like,
Yeah,
that would,
one of the
but,
things I'm thinking, if you want to really dig into this, we could do a map and a table
Right.
that has the assessors, when they were built, so you can see the whole city and each
Right.
neighborhood. The earliest I'm seeing, looks like the north part of Bella Vista is the late 50s, 1957. And as you go south, generally, looks like there are later dates. There's a lot of 1957s, but I'm also seeing some 80s, 1981, 86 for parts of Bella Vista as well, on the south of Bella Vista Drive. That might be a separate subdivision I'm
Yeah.
missing. Everything north of Bella Vista Drive looks like I see into the early 70s north of Bella Vista Drive.
and so then to go back to her question, as far as timeline,
Yeah, so now that
like,
we've,
what does that look like?
right, so now that we've broached this discussion, again, we're not here tonight to vote on the bylaws, but at some point in 2025, we will be, and unless we change it, 1955 is going to be approved. So where do we go from here in terms of discussing?
Yeah, so I would say if you want to change the date, which would be an ordinance change, that we probably want to study that more and think about different options. Certainly the easiest and most straightforward thing to do is to pick a different date. That has a lot of implications just from, outside of Bella Vista. It might help us make that decision if we saw how many homes outside of Bella Vista were done before 1970 or whatever date we might end up picking.
All right.
Could pick geographic areas and do demolition reviews in the geographic area. So I think there's any option that we want to recommend to city council, I think we need more information for sure. If you think the 1955 is inadequate, I think that's the primary question. Do you think there's that you would like to do demo reviews beyond 1955 because you're concerned about the loss of historic structures? So if you all agree yes on that, then we should start talking about how, what dates. So that might be a primary question that you all answer. I think it got brought up because of the bylaws.
Right.
Maybe more than you're concerned. But I guess that's a question for you all. Did it get brought up more because of the bylaws or more that you're actually concerned that the 1955 date is?
Right.
I think it's on the agenda because of the bylaws and the comment that those were out of sync. I never really understood which was which.
Right, so that's how it started. But then I think for me, when staff, it was really helpful what staff put together to clarify how those two different time periods emerged, and then really kind of showed the discussions that happened in the past on this commission and council about those. So as the sitting commission, I think now is an appropriate time to review those and make decisions moving forward.
So it might be worth having a future agenda item, maybe for early next year, where we do some more research, get some maps and data tables of all the different neighborhoods and the ages. And that would help you understand kind of what we're up against. And then put some more thought into if you want to make a recommendation to that demo change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. I think the geographic areas could help kind of, might be a little more easy to understand than like the tables and stuff maybe, if we kind of identify, but I think we can look at that and then compare it to like dates and figure out kind of, so I think those two strategies could be good to look at, so, yeah.
I kind of feel like it could be a combination, and maybe you slower roll the roll up of the 1955 if you have other overlay areas. But again, I think you're just trading one 1955 for another area and time period of another date. Like you're doing the same thing again. You're just
Right.
moving the date and area.
Right. Right, but there could be different geographic areas to it, but,
So.
and maybe, I don't know, that's how we're gonna do some studying, so that's good. Okay,
I think we need more information
yeah,
though,
we
for
need
sure.
more information. But, did you realize that there were the two dates?
I don't think I fully understood
Right.
it until this is
Yeah.
important.
So I
Like, I
think-
think it's really important to clarify and to discuss further.
Right, so I think it's a good reason to bring it up, so, thank you for doing that, yeah. So is that enough direction for staff, or,
Yeah, I think so. I think we could definitely bring back more information, put more thought into it, and then, ask the fundamental question first, maybe
Right.
Is the current code a concern? And if so, what might we adjust it to? Try to give you, if you think of any other information in the meantime you think would be helpful, certainly what I've thought is a map that, has a key with the dates. Probably, you can see the date ranges. Maybe we'll do date ranges by neighborhood.
right,
We'll come up with something so you can identify dates with different neighborhoods and where you think,
yeah,
you may want to get involved.
okay,
Then we have to think about, what would that mean to those neighborhoods? We might do if we get serious about it, we might want to do some outreach, some public outreach to those neighborhoods. So it could be a pretty big 2025 work item to really do it right, respect
right,
neighborhoods, do some public input.
yeah, okay,
I would say it'd be nice to understand the age of the homes in Louisville too. So like maybe by every 5 years, like what is the percentage of homes in Louisville or anything of that sort, just to understand when you're really hitting that threshold too of everything or a lot of it.
Yeah, it makes sense. We could put some of that together.
That could just be like an Excel chart or something.
that's good. All right,
Thank you.
is that all you needed for that?
Yeah.
Should I ask for public comment? All right.
Please.
All right, any public comment on 50 years versus 1955? Go ahead and just state your name and city of residence.
Andy Johnson, Louisville. So where I was going to take all this is exactly where Rob ended up taking it. I think it's absolutely spot on. This is a geographic question. This is not a number question. So the homes that we often get to study will have changes done in the 30s, 40s, usually 40s, 50s is where we see a lot of those changes. Those homes that were being changed at that time are 50 years old. And at that time, I'm sure everybody was like, tired of this home because it's not surviving. And the construction methods that were done back then really aren't that much different from post-World War II homes. They're not that great, sadly. And, you know, I think really until more contemporary standards came into play is when construction got better. But we don't build homes to be 100 years old. We get lucky when they are 100 years old. It's just the way we build. It's the West. It was a fury of building. I think the value that we place on our homes is highly subjective and it's emotional. And it should be, because we care, and that's what matters. I think this number that we talk about, whether it's 1955 or 50 years old, I mean, in the end, it's all arbitrary. We're just assigning a value to it, just like we are assigning the value of whether we want to preserve or landmark a home or not, right? Because home could be 50 years old or older. It could be older than 1955, and we may say no. The 50 years, keep in mind, that's not like a gold standard. That was an ability to have a minimum standard, like a code, minimum standard, not the standard, to be able to do preservation. Like if you said, well, our period of significance is actually more like 1958, well, you just took Kalachi's, the empire, out of the equation. That could get demoed without a review, and that would be really sad. And I think we'd all agree that that would be a loss of really important history for our core of Louisville. So, you know, for nearly 100 years, we had Louisville as a boundary, and it was 2,000 people, and it was that way for a really long time. And I think we can hang our hat on the fact that that geographic boundary had a lot of significance to the genesis, and then, you know, kind of the generations out of that of this town. So I love the idea of the map, Rob. I think that's great. I think that that would then put Bella Vista on the map in terms of the period of significance of that development. And maybe you start to look at not necessarily creating historic districts, but you do look at neighborhoods. You do, you know, kind of look at broader areas. But I really think we need to be thinking about at least where we are now in our history. What was the significant part of Louisville? What was the core of Louisville? Keep in mind, mining was an important part of our history. If you really look at the amount of time spent in the mines over a year, and then you look at like how long the mines really were open, it's not necessarily a blip on the map, but it's really not as big as we think it is. It's an important part of the history. It's what drew people here. We had agriculture, and we really overlooked that aspect very much. The fact that we were never a company town and we were able to develop local businesses downtown with no chains, and we still do that, that's cool. Like, we should be honoring all of these other traditions that we have still maintained, you know, through our contemporary practices of living in our town. 1955 wasn't when the mines closed. That's when the last mine closed. Keep in mind, these mines closed in the 20s and 30s because they ran out of steam. It was hard to mine. It was, you know, really temporary in terms of during how long during the year that they actually got to mine. And when it got to the end, you know, post World War II and right around, it was hard. Like, we had one mine actually for a decade, and that was it. Like, you know, that to me kind of places that 1955 as more of an end of an era than maybe a period of significance. And so if we want to define it that way, we want to say, yeah, this is our period of significance. That's not necessarily a number like the 50 years. The 50 years is an agreement that we've made on a much broader scale. 1955 to me is more of a philosophical, emotional assignment of what was important to Louisville in terms of, you know, what brought people here and what was the ultimate character of the town. So that 1955 is never going to change. That's the date that the mine closed. We know that. But I think, you know, what Commissioner Whitten said is absolutely right. Like, history is dynamic. It's going to keep rolling along. It has wheels. And we will eventually say, yeah, Bella Vista, that's part of our circle now, right? And it may not be yet. You guys get to discuss that. You get to have public comment on whether it is or not. But this is a geographic question. This is not a numbers question. So when the time comes for that evaluation, please take that into account. And also, I think that if we're going to talk about the history of our homes, you're actually really philosophically talking about the history of our town, not just the homes. Know why they were built, know who built them, and know, you know, where they came from. Know all those extra layers, because all of those are important little tidbits that you get to contribute. Wow, I went way over 3 minutes. Sorry, you should probably start the clock. Anyway, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.
Any more public comment? We'll give you extra credit if you have public comment. You can email your teacher. All right. All right, any?
I have one thing. As some of you know, my term on the commission is coming to an end. I've been supporting the Downtown Business Association puts together a newsletter every week or every month. I don't know how they publish it exactly, but all of the members put in ads for their place, but we always make a little pitch about what the Historic Preservation Commission does and talk about some structure that's been landmarked. I took that over from Caleb Dickinson when he moved to the city council. So if it's something you want to continue, someone will need to take that over.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I can provide a lot of files.
No, thank you for letting us know that.
Okay.
Yeah, well. All right. So any more discussion on this before I move on? Our next is items from staff. This is our CLG annual report.
Yes, so I'll start with some other updates first. We had one alteration certificate and 2 demolition reviews. All 3 were released in the past month. And then, yes, we did submit the CLG Certified Local Government Annual Report for the fiscal year 2024. The entire report can be found in the packet for tonight's meeting. I just wanted to highlight a few achievements here. We had 19 HSAs completed in the fiscal year, bringing our total landmarks to 66, and that included 4 new landmarks in the past year. And then just some other items from staff. The January and February meeting dates will be on holidays, so we'll have to come to a different meeting date for both of those dates. I have proposed here January 27th instead of the 20th, and February 24th instead of the 17th, but you know, that's not set in stone. And other than that, the next meeting will be December 16th at 6:30.
I was just gonna add, I know the commission wanted to do a discussion on HSAs. We haven't forgotten about that. We're intending to bring that back in December. We just didn't have enough time to get it ready for
Yeah.
this meeting date. So that's still, hopefully in December is our goal. And then if you wanna pick the alternate dates tonight, or if you think you need to go back and look at your calendars, we can send an email out with, and take a poll of alternative dates if easier.
I was just looking around. Supposed to be on Tuesdays instead of Mondays, the 27th and the 24th, is that right? No, I'm in the wrong year, sorry. Okay,
Those are probably the Monday.
okay, that's good.
Following Monday after your regular meeting day.
Yeah. That should be fine for me, but
It's fine for me too. I'm just a little sad that March 17th isn't considered a holiday.
okay. Sorry. Oh, that's not, is that what you said? Yeah.
You're free to wear shamrocks.
All right, and that's all from staff. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. All right. So Gary gave update on the DBA. Any other updates?
Yeah, sorry, I jumped in at the wrong time.
Nope, you're fine. Do you have anything else or anyone else? All right. Our last item is to adjourn.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn tonight's evening, or tonight's meeting.
I would second that.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us online, Marty.
Recording stopped.
Forgot to check in with him at all.
You did great. Thank you for attending, students.